Good morning. We're going to begin now a Sichah, Parshas Noach. The Sichah is printed in Chelik Chaf, volume 20, page 13. It's the first Sichah. As mentioned many times over this year, this is part of the project with the Sichos. Let us begin. Even Pasuk, B'tchilas Parshasenu, Elo Telos Noach, Noach ish tzadik tam hayo b'dei Esav. In regards to the beginning of this week's parsha, which the Torah says these are the children, these are the offsprings of Noach. Noach was a tzaddik, so Rashi brings down, Rashi brings what does it mean that Noach was a tamim, he was righteous, he was complete, in his generations. So in his generation. So Rashi brings down two perushim. The rabbis, some rabbis, darshan l'shvach, saying that if he would have been in another generation, he would have been considered even a greater tzaddik. And Meish Menabisenu Darshan, I say, Yesh Darshan, and some people expound that no, only in his generation, but had he been in the generation of Avram, he would have been considered nothing. Okay. So later, I posted the online, I'll have copies tomorrow. Later day, as b'deresa may nit l'shvach zon Razal, v'Rashi is mefarish, v'derei hayo tzaddik, v'ilo hayo b'derei shel Avram, lahei nechshav l'klum. Now, according to the Maimer Razal, they say that means Dafk in his generation, but in other generation, he would have been considered like, or in Avram's generation, he would have considered nothing. That's the two explanations that Rashi brings down. So the Rebbe says, nit glatik deloshin ilu hayo b'derei shel Avram. The wording, had he been in Avram's generation, it's problematic. Why? Avram is geboren nun ches shan lefnei misas Noach. Avram was born 58 years before Noach passed away. Read their simon from Ibn Ezra, like the Ibn Ezra says, Avram avinu ben nun ches kasher meis Noach. If you want to have a reminder of how old Avram Avinu was when Noach passed away, he was 58 years old. Is doch Noach given a meshach's man b'derei shel Avram. So Noach and Avram lived in the same generation. So what does it mean? What does Rashi mean by saying that had he been in Avram Avinu's generation, he would have been nothing? He was in Avram's generation. Now, so the Rebbe says, as betchilas yamav had Avram noch ere noch nit der greich zu dem shlemes hamadrege von tzaddik. So even though that Avram did not achieve the stature of a tzaddik in the beginning, Bez state the Medrash, even until the Medrash says, Shayavinu Avram is pached, v'emer teimar sheyesh biyadi ovein shayisi eved avedazara kol shanam alalu. It says, the Medrash says that Avram Avinu was worried, he was fearful that perhaps he's guilty of sin, because back in the day he worshipped idols for all those years. And only after, in Ershta Noach, is there Gevarin Makers Berin. Only afterwards did he become aware of the Eibishter. Oh, so we're going to see in a second. They're going to see in Eis Beis, there's a few different shittas. Wait, so give it 2 minutes, we'll see. Okay. Okay, we did that already. Yeah, is aber noch far zman ben nun cheshana hat shein l'chol deis makir given as better. Now, nevertheless, according to all opinions, Avram was aware of his Creator even before 58 years old. Wie der Rambam is marich b'reish hilchas avodah zara, wie Avram is von sich allein zugekommen zu wissen und makir sein dem Ebersten. Like the Rambam says clearly that in the beginning of avodah zara, that Avram became aware and he knew the Eberster, and he had no teacher, nor was there anyone to inform him, to guide him. Now, the Rebbe says in brackets, Nid vi Noach was seine Ideas v'akaros habera is mashma nit given bekeach atzmei. Not like Noach's knowledge was, and his recognition of the Eberster, as implied by the Rambam, was not something that Noach came on his own. Noach had a lot of help. First of all, you find this explicitly that Noach learned the secrets of Iber, of intercalculations. And who did he learn that from? As hat das gelernt von Chanech Shelach sein Zayden. He learned, like we learned in yesterday's Chitas that Lemech, right? Mesushelach bore Lemech bore Noach. So Mesushelach was the Zayda, and the Zayda taught him about Iber. Ubefrat, I posted the. Doesn't go. The second one, the second link goes. Second one doesn't go. Second one works. Okay. Ubefrat leit wie der Rambam schreibt. I'll have copies tomorrow. Ubefrat leit wie der Rambam schreibt, dass Mesushelach hat gehabt a Beis Medrash und a Beis-Din ist doch sicher sein Haupt Heinekel Noach is given dort gelernt dort. Like it says, and the Rambam says that Mesushelach first of all had a Beis Medrash. He had a yeshiva and he had a Beis-Din. So for sure his Haupt Heinekel, his prodigy of a grandchild, for sure learned it. As Mekabel gewen von andere von Farim, der is euch der Chilik ben Gea, sehr anoga. And especially you see this regarding the difference of his anoga, of his disposition. Rashi says that Noach needed the Eibishter's help, he needed support to sustain him. Whereas Avram, he strengthened himself and practiced righteousness on his own. Okay, so what the Rebbe is trying to, so the question is again, wie is masim zu sagen, ilu hoye b'derech shel Avram, b'shas as Noach is yagiv an ha-meshach zman in im derech von Avram, sheinoch dem vi Avram hikar is better. So first of all, if you want to say that, no, Avram Avinu was also guilty of sin. So first of all, he was hikar is better even before 58 years old. So there was a meshach zman that Avram Avinu was makar is better, lived in the same generation as Avram Avinu, as Noach. So what does it mean? What does Rashi mean by saying Ilu Hoya B'Derech Shel Avram? They were in the same generation. Zog the Rebbe weiter, Afilim is all teitchen. As even if you're going to teach, as Derech Shel Avram meint, und hebt sich an, nicht von Zman Avram Aveda mit sich, nor von sind hat aufgetan mit andere. Now, even if you're going to say that when we say Avram's generation, it doesn't refer at the time of his own development, but rather it refers to the period that he began to influence others. Like it says, as hanefesh asher asu b'charan, the souls that he made in Charan. And like Rashi says, the Gadim. Und wie die Gemara sagt, das Davke von demot haben sich angeheben die Shnei Alafim Teda. And like the Gemara says over there, that the 2,000 years of Torah began specifically in this period, when he started making Gadim. Is doch euch der Uftu gewinnt, kam Jahren fahr Mrs. Noach. Wie die Gemara sagt, gemidi da Avram, bei Yishaita, bei Chamshe v'Taitin Hava. Now, Noach was still alive at that time. As the Gemara says, it was taught, it's a tradition, that at the time Avram was 52 years old. Okay, so that's number one. Now, when again, what you're saying, how old was he? So we'll see. It's not so pashut that he was 3 years old. Now, zokt in base. Wegen dem Gil ben Avram hikers beides and da kamedes. So there are several opinions in regards to Avram Avinu's age of when he was aware of his creator. First of all, according to Gemara brings down in Nedarim, Ben Gimel, he was 3. Or Ben Mem, he was 40. Ben Mem Ches, he was 48. And another opinion holds Ben Nun, he was 50. So you have 3, 40, 48, and 50. 50, yeah. Okay, now the Rambam in Hilchos Avodah Zarah zogt as ben arboim shana hiker Avram is beiri. Now the Rambam in Hilchos Avodah Zarah says that Avram Avinu was 40 years old when he became aware of the Eibishter. Now zogt of them the Ravid, so the Ravid comments right away and says Eshagoda min shalish shanim shenemer eikav asher shama Avram bekeli minyan eikav. Now the Ravid right away says that Avram. There's a medrash that says, or there's an Agada that says Avram Avinu was 3 years old. Why? Because he says, what does it say? The Eibishter says, Ekev asher shemaiti b'koili. Ekev is B'Gemashria 172, which means Ekev asher shemaiti b'koili. How many years was he shemaiti b'koili? 172. Fine. So Rambam says 40, Rabbah says it's a Shita 3. Now the Kesef Mishnah comes. Right, the Rebbeis of Cairo comes and he is metavich both. He says like this: the Kesef Mishnah is masber. The Kesef Mishnah explains as efshel lekayim zeh v'zeh Be'emes, you could say that both opinions are correct. What does that mean? The ben shalim shalim haya kishis lachshiv chuli, that he was 3 years old when he began to think and become aware of Hashem. But when he was 40 years old, he was fully aware. In other words, he started to search. He started the journey of searching for the Eibishter, and then at 40 years old, he says, "Oh, okay, this is the truth."
We're expected to do this in less than this time.
Huh?
We're expected to do this in less than time.
Right. That's why education. That's why the Rebbe said. What was the Rebbe say when a child? Always stressed when a child starts speaking lamdan esei teretziva. For these reasons, there's things that a child gets in the first 3, 4 years old. Okay, now he says the Kesevishta says weiter that v'Rabbeinu kosav ha'ikar shu gmar ha'akara ha'keda ta'aynu k'shei ben arbaim shana. He says that the Rambams wrote because his main heker was when he was 40. And you could say that the Rambam's version he had was 40 years old. And not 48 years old, as it says in some books. Okay, that's what you have the Rambam, you have the Ravid, you have the Kesef Mishnah, which is Metavich both. Zog the Rebbe, Medarf aber verstehen, we need clarity. Bald das Girs an der Futze in Rosh Mishalfanenu is Ben Memchas Shana. He Avram as Beiroi, since the widespread version in the Midrashim is that Avram Avinu was 48 years old. Was hat der Rambam angenommen darf die Girse von Ben Arbaim Shana Hiker Avram as Beiroi. So why did Avram adapt the version that? Why did the Rambam adapt the version that Avram was 40 years old when he became aware of his Creator? That's one shaila. I don't know why it's not a shaila on the Kesef Mishnah. It's in general, it's a shaila. Okay. Zog the Rebbe, oich darfen verstehen. We also need clarity. Bal is after the kind v'zeh side die as ben shalish hikers beiri. Und side die as is given ben arbaim. Und der Rambam allein that betchas halacha wegen dem. Wie Avram is given bekat nusoi. What does the Rambam say? Kiven shenigmal eson zeh. Hischel sheitet bedaiti vu kotem hischel achshev. Now the Rambam says that Avram became aware. Right? We have both opinions. The Kesef Mishnah says you have the opinion that Avram Avinu became aware when he was 3 years old, and the opinion that he was 40 years old. And the Rambam himself, at the beginning of his explanation, describes that Avram as a child, that after, what does the Rambam say? After the mighty child was weaned, he began to explore and think. Now, though he was a child, the Rambam says, he began to think. So the question is, why doesn't the Rambam explicitly state that he began to think when he was there? The Rambam says it in other places. So if the Kesef Mishnah is correct, the Rambam should have said that he's chalachshiv. Why does the Rambam say ben arboim? Okay. Gimel. So basically, what we said in Beis is we brought down the different opinions of how old Avram Avinu was. The Rambam says he was 40. The Ravid says there's an Agoda that says he was 3. The Kesef Mishnah says that he started to think or explore about Hashem, and he was his Shloimy was that yes, there's idea of monotheism. The Eibishter is at 40 years old. The Rebbe said if the Girsa Nefutza is 48, the rise of the Rambam go 40. And also, why does the Rambam say clearly, like he says in other places, his chul? Yeah, okay. Gimel. So now, vet das sein moving behektem klalas habir Rambam hilchos avodah zarah. We'll understand this by first prefacing the general explanation of the Rambam hilchos avodah zarah. In the ersten parak, hebt on the Rambam, in the first parak of hilchos avodah zarah, the Rambam says, the Rambam gives the whole history. He says, B'yemei Enosh Tov Bnei Adam Toz Godel. He says that during the times of Enosh, humanity made a very big sin. Und nachdem wir es mevar barucha zer tois zer mesayim v'zo. What did I say?
You said sin.
Sorry, a big sin, a mistake of their sin.
Mistake, which is a sin.
Yeah, okay. Und nachdem wir es mevar barucha zer Torah zer Messiah v'zahu ikar avodah zarah. And then the Rambam concludes and says this was the essence of avodah zarah. So the Rambam gives you the whole history of how Bimei Enish they started avodah zarah and how they ended up into avodah zarah. And the Rambam says this was the essence of idolatry. Now the Noach is their mamshech in halacha beis, and then the Rambam continues in halacha beis. And then afterwards, many years passed, so people arose, false prophets, who claimed that Hashem commanded them to declare, serve the star. Und is mefaret und masber wie me hat angeheben dienen keiche pleni. Und es mevar barichus wie me is später arunter bis zum niedrigste Schlaf von Avodah Zarah. And the Rambam then details how the beginning of Avodah Zarah started. They started worshiping this star, and then he describes at length how later they became worse and worse, and they engaged in all the forms of Avodah Zarah. Now, and then what happened is that after years have passed, Hashem, the glorious and awesome name, was forgotten by the entire population, and no one was aware of him except for a few. These individuals, these who knew about Hashem. Until until the world continued in this fashion, until the pillar of the world was born, which this was the great Avram Avinu. This is what he says in Halacha Beis. Now, in Halacha Gimel is a mevar barichas ve'Avram zugekommen lahakes beirei, und wegen aller Meisim in Yonim Neilim was hat getan nach dem einzupflanzen, dem Iker Godel Akoras Beirei Ba'avedasei, in Herzen von Alafim Revavis, bis Hediel Yitzchak B'nei. Now, in Halacha Gimel, the Rambam explains at length how Avram reached an awareness of the Eibishter, and describes Avram's noble act afterwards to bring the great fundamental principle, should be conscious of the Eibishter in the hearts of thousands of people. This continued until he taught Yitzchak his son. Yitzchak Hediel Yaakov, Yaakov Lamed Banav. Yitzchak told Yaakov, Yaakov told his children. Und wie es ist gewähnt, der Matze von Bnei Yaakov, bis der Eibishter hat geschickt Moshe Rabbeinu und gegeben die Mitzvahs zu Yidden und das alles mit einer Aricha Gdela. So the Rambam explains that how Moshe Rabbeinu came, gave the mitzvahs to the Jewish people, and this is all described at length in great detail. Now the Rebbe asks like this: was the Cheres das nicht moving? The Rambam is a sefer von Halachas Halachas. Wie der Rambam schreibt, Ba'akdama Sifrei, nicht kein Sefer was der zelt Divrei Yimei Olam oder viele Divrei Yimei Yisrael. The Rebbe said this many times, cited by Rashi. Rashi has his style, and the Rambam has his style. The Rambam style is a book of law by law. The Rambam tells you the facts of the law. It's not a book of world history. It's not a book that records the stories of the Jewish people. So the question is, Tavas is negela halacha die ganze Arichas von kol haperek. Wie azes is given die Stadlus Hayirida von Evdei Avodah Zarah von Zint Yimei Enish and weiter. So the question is, what significance to tell me this great lengthy description of this entire perek discussing the Avodah Zarah from the times of Enish until bis zum Zman when Boch Hashem b'Yisrael and Achla v'chtirim b'mitzvos v'edim derech avidasei and ma'yeh mishpat Avodah Zarah v'chol teim achara. So what significance is it till people served Avodah Zarah, until Hashem chose the Yidden, He crowned them with mitzvahs and He formed them in the path to serve Him, and He taught them the judgment of Avodah Zarah and all those who stray it. For what reason? Why does the Rambam have to tell us this history? Now, wenn der Rambam wollte gemacht werden gewesen, als Adam Arishan ist nicht stabil geworden, Ali Sur Avodah Zarah, if the Rambam would have prefaced by saying that Adam Arishan was commanded about the Isser of Avodah Zarah, you can't find infinite, al kaponim bedechik, so you could answer, at least with difficulty, as Arichas Hanals negeat to them, was the Rambam schreibt weiter in Perek Beis. So you could say that the reason why the Rambam is Meirich in this, he relates this in length, is to what the Rambam says later in Perek Beis. The Rambam says that anybody who is Moide admits into Avodah Zarah, ובכל מה שנצטב הנביאים מאדם ועד סוף העולם. So, if the Rambam would have prefaced by saying that Adam Arishan was commanded about the Isser of Avodah Zarah, so one can say with difficulty that the lengthy this of the Rambam is Myrich and writes later in Perek Beis, because he says that anybody who is Moedan Avodah Zarah is everything that has been commanded to the prophets from Adam until eternity. Now, so since Noach's the Noahides were also commanded not to engage in Avodah Zarah and idolatry, so this that the Rambam now has with great arichas aschot shemeshach von kama v'kama deris von zinti mei enish ve'elech chotmin gedint Avodah Zarah, that even though for many generations from Yemei Enish they served Avodah Zarah, biz as pasha davar zeh b'chol ha'olam, the entire world was serving Avodah Zarah, it spread, so menit meinin as by zeh is thus nit given kein iser. We shouldn't think that by them there was no prohibition, nor is had their mit ever given eif tziva Hashem, but they also they desecrated the commandment of Hashem. Now that would have made sense if why the Rambam has to give this arichas to tell us that even from Adam also, even though they weren't commanded yet, but if you're telling me from Adam to tell me that even that all the way up they were all worshiping Avodah Zarah and they all violated the command of Hashem. The Rebbe says this: the Rambam aber der Mond nicht in dem ganzen Perek as Adam Rishon is nestave geworden auf Avodah Zarah. However, in the entire chapter, the Rambam makes no mention that Adam Rishon was commanded to desist from Avodah Zarah. Und es bechlal nit madgish dem Geidel ha'Isser bedavar oich in jenem zmanim. And the Rambam also doesn't emphasize the severity that applies to the period that the people in that period that they were violated this Isser. So Kumteis comes out as the Hemshech of Aricha Sipar Yonim in Gans Perek is L'chera Bloisa Sipar Mo'uras. So it comes out that the entire Rambam is just one narrative comprising of one Perek. Vosat Kein Sheiches Nitzum Sefer Hayah for Rambam was in Yoni is halachis, which L'chera has no recounting of historical events, and it doesn't correlate with the Rambam's Sefer Hayad, which he says that he's a book of halachas. Okay, Dalit. Shloimy. So we can say like this: as their Perek Adishim Hilchos Avodah Zarah V'Arichos in Yonav is a hakdama klalus ala halachas Avodah Zarah in Rambam. You could say that the first Perek in Hilchos Avodah Zarah and the details that the Rambam presented in this Perek is a general introduction to all of Hilchos Avodah Zarah in the works of the Rambam. The Bir B'zeh. What's the explanation? The Chet from Avodah Zarah, so the sin of idolatry of Avodah Zarah, Chotchas B'chlalus Bashtet von Isurim B'negea the Maaseh B'Pela B'Avodah Zarah. So even though the prohibition involving action and Avodah Zarah, it has to be with actually serving Avodah Zarah, strange service. However, the substance and the essence of the Avodah Zarah relates to a person's thoughts. Das was trach beliebe machshavte as a nivre a malach a galgal is alokai. How does it start? He contemplates and he thinks that any creation, an angel or a sphere, is asarser mitzis b'fnei atzmei. So, what's the Avodah Zarah? A person is not oiver iser Avodah Zarah, right? By action, only by action. But let's say a person thinks and contemplates, he's not going to be over the iser of Avodah Zarah. But the substance and the essence of Avodah Zarah, that relates to a person's thought. So when he contemplates, he thinks that any creation, an angel, a sphere, Avodah Zarah, or even a sarsa, even if, okay, he's not a god, but he's an intermediary. Such a thought is also explicitly asr. Now, why? Was euch das is an isim mefurish is also asr. When we the Rambam is mefared in the halachas gleich b'chilas perek beis, and the Rambam explains in these paragraphs right at the beginning of chapter 2. That the essence of the commandments forbidding Avodah Zarah is not to serve any of the creations and not even a malach. Now, Even if a person worshiping knows that Hashem is the true Hashem and serves the creations in the manner in which Enish worship, you should know the Torah warned us. I love the Torah warned us about this. Shema Toshav Ba'ayin Libcha Tira She'elu Hein HaManhigim HaSo'ilam V'heim Shechalak Hashem Oisan Chuli V'temer Shadol Ishtachos Lahem La'avdan. So what does a person say? That a person will inquire with the eye of the heart, and it might appear that these entities control the world, having been apportioned by Hashem. So therefore the Torah says that you're not allowed to bow down to them and you're not allowed to worship them. So now a person could think he could bow to them. For this reason, the Torah commands and says, this implies that the heart should not lead you astray to worship these and make them as a sarser between you and Hashem. Okay, and Mirz Hashem will start. Hey.